173,618. That number deserves a moment of silence, because it is the entire story of this video, and no engine on Earth has ever matched it. It is not a serial number, and it is not a part number. It is a count, not the Merlin, not the mighty radials of Wright or the V-12s of Germany. Nothing in the whole history of powered flight was ever built in numbers like this. It is 1944, and at a government plant outside Chicago, a factory that belongs to Buick, a company that spent the 30s building sedans for dentists, is turning out 14-cylinder aircraft engines in a river that does not stop. Day shift, night shift, weekends, holidays, a torrent of finished engines moving toward the war. Every one of them is bound for a bomber plant in Michigan where, at the peak, a complete 4-engined heavy bomber rolls out the door every single hour. Every hour, 4 more engines fly away, and the river behind them just keeps coming. The engine is the Pratt and Whitney R1830 Twin Wasp, 14 cylinders of air-cooled Connecticut engineering, and by the time its production run ended in 1951, 173,618 of them had been built, more than any aviation engine in history, before or since. And here is the strange part. It was not the most powerful engine of its war, not the fastest, not the most glamorous, outshone in every headline by its own bigger brother. And that is the open question this video exists to answer. When America decided which engine to multiply beyond all reason, it did not choose the strongest one. It chose this one. By the end of this video, you will know exactly why, and you will know why that choice, more than almost any other single piece of machinery, is what victory actually ran on. The story starts in 1929 in East Hartford, Connecticut, with an experiment. Pratt and Whitney had built its young name on the single-row Wasp radial, 9 cylinders arranged in a ring like the chambers of a revolver, cooled by nothing but the air the airplane flew through. No radiators, no plumbing, no coolant to leak or freeze or boil. Simplicity was the whole religion, but a single ring of cylinders can only grow so large before the airplane around it becomes all engine, and the question on the drawing boards was simple and dangerous. What if you put a second ring of cylinders behind the first? Dangerous, because the front row lives in clean, cold air, and the back row lives in the front row's wake, breathing air that has already done a day's work of cooling. Get the arrangement wrong, and the rear cylinders cook themselves to death at altitude. Solve it, and the same frontal area suddenly holds half again the cylinders. The work that answered it came together from 1931 under Luke Hobbs, one of the great engine men of the century, and the result flew as the Twin Wasp. 14 cylinders, 2 rows of 7, the rear row peeking through the gaps in the front row so every cylinder still got its share of the wind. 1,830 cubic inches of displacement, the number that named it, with a bore and a stroke of exactly 5.5 inches each, a perfectly square engine. The construction was quietly advanced for its day. A forged aluminum crankcase carrying the whole ring of forces. Magnesium used liberally to strip weight. A multi-layered master rod bearing designed to survive power levels the first engines would never even be asked for, which tells you the designers already knew where this was going. It first ran in 1932 at around 750 horsepower, and through most of the 1930s it was the largest engine under development in the United States, the biggest bet in American aviation, being placed one hand-fitted engine at a time. Its first decade reads like a tour of aviation's golden age. In November of 1935, Twin Wasps hauled the Martin 130 China Clipper off the water at Alameda and out across the Pacific on the inaugural Transocean Commercial Service, the most romantic flying job on Earth, San Francisco to Manila by way of specks of coral, thousands of miles of open water with 14 air-cooled cylinders per engine as the only argument between the mail and the sea. Newsreel cameras rolled, crowds lined the shore, and the engine that would one day be built by car companies in the hundreds of thousands made its public debut, carrying the most glamorous cargo of the decade. In 1937, United's new Douglas DC-3s went into service with 1,000 horsepower Twin Wasps, and the engine settled into the airframe. It would be married to for the rest of the century. The airliner that made passenger flying an ordinary thing an ordinary family might actually do, on a schedule, in comfort, at a price. Engine and airframe suited each other so perfectly that 90 years later the partnership still has not fully ended. A fact this video will get to. Fighters took it too. The Seversky P-35 and the Curtiss P-36 Hawk, America's frontline pursuit ships of the late 30s, which means that when the war finally came, the Twin Wasp had already spent a decade doing every job aviation had. And all through those years the engine grew the modern way, not by getting bigger, but by breathing harder. Pratt and Whitney marched it through the whole science of forced induction. Single-stage supercharging first, a gear-driven pump cramming sea-level air into the cylinders at altitude, then two-stage supercharging, one pump feeding another so the engine could keep its strength where the air runs out and the fighting happens, then turbo supercharging, spinning the pump with the engine's own exhaust. Output climbed from 750 horsepower toward the 1,200 that became the wartime standard, with the final versions reaching 1,350, nearly double the original from the same 1,830 cubic inches. It had exactly one vice. With a high compression ratio for its day, it demanded the highest octane fuel available, an appetite the airlines grumbled about all through the 30s, and the military, with its bottomless wartime supply of good gasoline, simply ignored. Then came May of 1940. France was falling, the newsreels were full of dive bombers, and on the 26th, President Roosevelt sat down at the microphone for a fireside chat and asked American industry for 50,000 combat aircraft in a year. Listeners were stunned. The number was widely considered impossible, a politician's fantasy. Aircraft engines were hand-fitted, craftsman-built things, assembled by men who had apprenticed for years, and the entire aircraft industry's engine capacity was a rounding error against that demand. 50,000 airplanes meant something on the order of 150,000 engines, and there was exactly one industry on Earth that thought in numbers like that. The answer was one of the great industrial decisions in American history. If the aircraft industry could not build enough engines, the car industry would. Pratt and Whitney licensed the Twin Wasp out to the masters of mass production, and the engine that had been a Connecticut craftsman's product became, in effect, a General Motors product line. Drawings translated, tooling multiplied, hand-fitting engineered out so that assembly line workers could build what artisans had built. Buick took over a brand new government-built plant at Melrose Park, outside Chicago, hired and trained a workforce by the thousands, and built Twin Wasps there in staggering volume. Every single one of them destined for the B-24 Liberator, and by some accounts, Buick's share alone came to more than 40% of all Twin Wasps ever made. A company that had never built an aircraft engine became, within 2 years, one of the largest aircraft engine builders in human history. Chevrolet built them too. Commonwealth Aircraft built them in Australia. And after the war, a Swedish firm built them under license for Sweden's own Air Force. At the far end of the pipeline stood the most famous factory of the war, Ford's Willow Run in Michigan. 3.5 million square feet of floor. A building so large it was raised over a creek, and the creek simply kept flowing underneath, stamping out B-24 Liberators the way Detroit stamped out sedans. At peak, one complete 4-engined heavy bomber rolled out the door every single hour, around the clock, each one sheathed in thousands of square feet of aluminum and hung with 4 Buick-assembled Twin Wasps that shook the ground on its test flight. 8,645 Liberators came from that one building, 9,800 more from the other plants, more than 18,000 in all, the most produced American warplane in history, and every single one of them lifted off on 4 Twin Wasps. The arithmetic on the bomber program alone tells the story. 4 engines on each of more than 18,000 airframes before a single spare is counted, well past 70,000 installations from one aircraft type. That is how an engine reaches 173,000. Everything else it powered, the transports and the flying boats and the fighters of a dozen nations, took the number the rest of the way, and turned it from surprising into inevitable. So where did all of them go? The honest answer is everywhere, which is the point of this engine. Across its life, the Twin Wasp powered 89 different types of aircraft, military and civil, and the short list is a map of the entire war. The B-24 Liberators carried it over every front there was, the longest-legged heavy bomber of the war. Very long-range Liberators closed the mid-Atlantic air gap, the black hole in the ocean where the U-boat packs had hunted beyond the reach of any patrol, and the Battle of the Atlantic turned in the convoy's favor. Liberators burned the refineries and crossed distances the enemy had counted as armor. Wherever the map said too far, the answer was 4 Twin Wasps and a full fuel load. The C-47 Skytrains, 9,600 military versions of the DC-3, carried it everywhere else. Over the Himalayan hump into China, the most dangerous scheduled flying of the war, ice and downdrafts and 20,000-foot rock in the clouds, month after month, because a whole Allies war effort rode on what those 2 engines per airplane could haul. Into Normandy in the dark, towing gliders and spilling paratroopers. Into every rough strip on Earth where the war needed beans, bullets, or a way home for the wounded. No gun turrets, no bomb bay, no glory, and no theater of the war that could have functioned a week without it. The PBY Catalina flying boats droned behind Twin Wasps through patrols measured in entire days aloft, crews eating and sleeping in shifts while the 2 engines simply ran, hour upon hour over empty ocean, finding fleets, shadowing raiders, guarding convoys, and pulling drowning airmen out of the sea by the thousand. For a downed flyer in the water, the distant drone of 2 Twin Wasps was the sound of being found, and the Grumman F-4F Wildcats fought behind it, using the 2-stage supercharged versions to hold their own at altitude against a lighter, nimbler enemy. Through the carrier battles of 1942, the darkest year of the Pacific War, when holding the line was the entire job description, and the Wildcat, on this engine, held it. Add the torpedo bombers of the early Pacific, the British Sunderland flying boats, and some of the Wellingtons, the fighters it powered for Sweden and Australia under license, the trainers and transports and patrol ships of a dozen nations, 89 different aircraft types across its life, and the picture resolves into something no other engine can claim. Wherever the war was, on whichever ocean, in whichever hemisphere, this engine was already there, turning. Which brings us back to the question from the top. Why this engine? It was never the strongest. Its own big brother, the R2800 Double Wasp, the engine this channel has already covered for surviving direct hits, made half again the power and took all the glory rides in the hot fighters. The answer is the least romantic and most important virtue in all of engineering. The Twin Wasp worked, every time. The 2 great wartime versions have been described by engine historians as probably the most reliable air-cooled radials ever built, and reliability, multiplied by 173,000, stops being a maintenance statistic and becomes a strategic weapon. Here is the math the generals actually lived by. A bomber force is only as real as its engine availability. 1,000 airframes with grounded engines is a parking lot. A transport network across the Himalayas is a promise written entirely in mean time between failures. An escort carrier's fighters matter only if they start. America did not need its most brilliant engine in every airplane. It needed an engine that would run today and tomorrow and the day after, in Arctic air over the Aleutians and jungle rot in the Solomons and desert grit over Libya, maintained at midnight, in the open, by teenagers with 6 weeks of training and a flashlight. That was the Twin Wasp's actual job description, and nothing else on Earth filled it at that scale. 14 cylinders of forgiveness, 173,000 times. Call it the infantry of engines. The R2800 won the duels, and earned every word of its legend. The R1830 won the war of presence, the war of showing up everywhere, always, in numbers the enemy could not comprehend and could not match. German engine plants under bombardment struggled to keep their exquisite V12s flowing. America had car companies pouring out Twin Wasps like radios. That asymmetry, engines as a commodity on one side and engines as a craft on the other, is one of the quietest reasons the war ended the way it did, and this 14-cylinder radial is its purest expression. The end of the war was brutal to the airplanes and strangely kind to the engine. The B-24, the most produced American warplane in history, was declared obsolete almost overnight, outclassed by the new generation before the surrender ink dried. Stateside bombers flew one last flight, straight to desert storage in the Southwest and on to the smelters. Across the Pacific, thousands were simply parked where the war ended, the oil drained from their Twin Wasps, and left standing for the scrappers, whole airfields of brand new bombers waiting quietly to be cut apart. Of the more than 18,000 built, 14 complete airframes exist anywhere on Earth today, and exactly one of them still flies. An entire wartime sky, the largest bomber fleet America ever built, reduced to a single survivor. Machines this channel covers do not usually die that young, or that completely. The Liberator gave everything, all at once, and then vanished almost to the last rivet, which makes what happened to its engine all the stranger. But the engine walked out of the graveyard because the other half of its life's work was only beginning. The war had scattered surplus C-47s and crated Twin Wasps across the whole planet at giveaway prices. And on that cheap, indestructible foundation, the entire post-war air freight and feeder airline world was built. Bush operators in Alaska, cargo lines in Africa and South America, island hoppers everywhere the big airlines would not go. DC-3s on Twin Wasps hauled passengers, mail, and cargo through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and simply never stopped, outliving the airlines that flew them, then the airlines that bought them secondhand. The Navy's privateer cousins of the Liberator found a second career dropping retardant on American wildfires all the way into the 2000s, and the bored-out R-2000 descendant carried the four-engine DC-4 besides. The airframes the Twin Wasp was famous for died young. The engine itself declined the invitation and kept declining it for 80 years. And it declines it still. Right now, in 2026, more than 90 years after the first one fired in East Hartford, Twin Wasps remain an honest revenue service on working DC-3s and across the warbird circuit, with a live market in spares and second-hand engines keeping them turning, decade after decade, on parts stamped before most of their pilots were born. No factory makes them anymore. No factory has needed to. When you build 173,000 of something that refuses to wear out, the supply outlives the century, and the last Twin Wasp will almost certainly still be running when everyone who remembers the war is gone. At any good airshow with a DC-3 or a Catalina on the ramp, the sound is still there to be had. 28 cylinders of 1935 swinging past the crowd line, a deep, unhurried, utterly dependable drone, the most ordinary, extraordinary sound in aviation. It is the sound the Clipper passengers heard over the Pacific, the sound the paratroopers heard over Normandy, the sound a rescued airman heard coming for him across the water. Most of the people hearing it today have no idea they are listening to the most produced aviation engine ever made. Now you do, and it changes what the sound means. This one is for the biggest generation of them all, and the comment section is open. If your father or grandfather flew behind Twin Wasps in a Liberator over Europe, a Skytrain over the Hump, a Catalina over the long water, a Wildcat off a carrier deck, if you turned wrenches on them yourself as an A and P in the years when every small airport had a DC-3 out back, or if you ever rode one anywhere at all, and for 3 decades that was simply called flying, tell that story below, with the details, because this channel and this audience are exactly where those stories belong. Somebody in your family, in some year between 1935 and last Tuesday, almost certainly trusted this engine with their life. Most families never learned its name. Today, in your house at least, that gets corrected, and the debate, because the aviation men have been waiting for it. 173,000 Twin Wasps, or the raw power and battle damage legend of its big brother, the R2800. Numbers or muscle? Which engine actually mattered more to winning the war? Make the case below and be ready to defend it. If you are watching this in its first week, there is a hype button under this video. Tapping it costs you nothing, and it genuinely helps a small channel like this one get found. And then tap subscribe, because next time we leave the sky for the rails and cover the steam engine they brought back from the dead. And here at the Loud era, the old iron always has one more story left to tell.